This is my good friend Susan, and you got it, Susan.
Well, thank you, Dale. That is, I think about that a lot. How long I've been your friend and just associated with the Realtor family. Not to completely age myself, you guys, but for those of you who may not know me as well, I actually started working for VPAR in 1991 when I was in grad school. And that was more years than I can even begin to contemplate. But I was a newlywed and there were no children on the scene. So that's been a long time. But it's good to see everybody this afternoon, and I appreciate your time. There's a lot going on, obviously, with this all virtual life. If you can imagine what we're doing right now, doing this with members of the House and the Senate in subcommittee, committee, and in the House, at least with floor sessions where you can see the speaker and she's at her dais in the chamber, and then she'll pull in whomever is speaking, and so you can see the speaker view. But it is Zooming all day long, and my running joke has been, I think my retinas are burning because this is all I do all day long, like you guys. But let me get right to it, and I'll try to leave a couple minutes of time for some questions. I want to get to what are our primary bills this year. We only have a few, and but it's a few that is some of them are heavy lifting. So I'm glad we were minimalists this year and followed the instructions from leadership to be very strategic and be very focused and be very limited, because they are doing the same. There are only about 1,200 bills in the system this year, which is not a lot compared to the 4,000 we had in the 2020 session. So let's get right to our things. I'll go with the easy ones first. The legislation that would essentially allow for POA and condo association boards to conduct their business electronically has flown out of the House. The vote was, just checking my notes to make sure, because it's really hard when they're 98-0 and 99-0 and 100-0, but I still want to give you the right vote count. So that measure actually came out 99-0 and will be headed to the Senate soon. The legislation that will allow for federal foreclosure conformity. Virginia was a little bit off kilter with the federal law. So all this is a technical issue. It just is that fix. It's a conformity matter that the legislature likes to have. They do not like to be non-conforming with the federal government or with the federal statute. That legislation has passed 98-0 out of the House and is going on to the Senate. And we expect easy reads out of both of those measures. The other two remaining pieces of legislation, well, let me qualify that and say the other two issue areas are in fact taking quite a bit of time, but we knew that going in. So I'll start with the less difficult of the two, although it's been interesting. So you all know, living where we live in Hampton Roads, like on a beautiful day like today with sunny skies and such, we've had a ton of rain and some snow, and so there is standing water and pooling water within properties, like on our own yards, right? I mean, it's kind of inundated, and we've known that flooding is an ongoing issue, particularly in our region, but other parts of Virginia are likewise beginning to see it. The Valley, Roanoke, Southwest Virginia. It's recurrent flooding is now really a statewide issue. And with 50% of our membership being buyer agents, when I say our membership, I'm using sort of the VR universe right there. But with about 50% of our members being buyer agents, we were being asked, we need something. Our buyers need something, and we also need to protect the listing agents and the sellers from any undue liability. So we've been working on this issue for many, many years, trying to find some common ground. And there has always been just a perennial bill out of a legislator from Virginia Beach. She, in fact, is a broker, so she gets what we do. She gets what you all do. She is a buyer agent. And so her approach has always been much more of straight, no questions asked, affirmative seller disclosure. And we have simply said that's not the only answer. There's another way to approach this. So after many years of successfully defeating Delegate Converse Fowler's bill, we have been working for the past several months with the delegate and with Senator Linwood Lewis from the Eastern Shore on an answer. And what we were hearing, especially out of some of our Hampton Roads members of City Council or our Hampton Roads legislators, is we've got to do something about these properties that are subject to repeated loss. How can we protect the repetitive loss properties? And how can we still give the buyers information? So sometimes it is really a timing issue. And so we have timed this one really well. So Senate Bill 1389 from Senator Lewis. And I mean, who doesn't deal with flooding on the Eastern Shore? He knows it pretty well. And Delegate Converse Fowler, House Bill 2030, both are moving very, very well. So here's how the bill started. The bill started as a update to the Department of Conservation and Recreation website that would include information for the buyer in a drop-down kind of a portal. It's already there. It mirrors FEMA. So there wasn't going to be, we thought, anything significant to deal with in that technology. And then the bill also would include an affirmative seller disclosure only on repeated risk loss properties, repetitive loss, which is a FEMA definition. So we're not creating anything new. And it is only on those properties as defined by FEMA. A repetitive risk loss is defined as any claim made by an owner that is up to $1,000, two claims up to $1,000, $1,000 or more within a 10-year period, going back to 1978 when the National Flood Insurance Program was first formed. So there are some definite qualifiers there. It's not a blanket affirmative seller disclosure. It is limited to two $1,000 claims or more over a 10-year rolling period, and that is defined by FEMA. So we took the issue, to the governor's office, to the Secretary of Natural Resources, because we are hearing that they had some concerns about the bill. So when you hear those sorts of issues, you go straight to the source and you have a discussion and you try to find a solution. Here's where the timing was really good for us. The DCR website is being updated. That was great. What we didn't realize was there was going to be an enormous fiscal impact because the technology is behind and the DCR website was not going to be able to talk to the website, that would allow the technology to be completed in a way that the buyer could then take and use somewhere else. But we found a solution because we don't like things to have a fiscal impact. That is a signal that it's going to cost money, and sometimes that is a dead on arrival type of an approach. So we realized that we could go through DPOR and we could create through the buyer beware form, there would be an autofill on the DCR that would link up to the DPOR website, and it would cost no money, which is always a good approach. So our fiscal impact statement is zero. Martin Johnson, our chief lobbyist, knows that I run point on budget issues for a lot of my clients. So I know the budget pretty well. And I was able to work with some of the staff in Senate Finance and say, we're good. No fiscal impact, we're good. And that has been very helpful. The bill actually came out of Senate Finance yesterday unanimously and will be going to the Senate floor. The House side, pretty much the same play. And it is moving very, very well also. And so I think we're in very good shape with that bill. And I'll tell you guys, we ran this idea through the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission to get buy-in from our region. And they were thrilled. They know that this is a different approach. They know that the affirmative seller disclosure was a really big deal for the Association of Realtors to not just go along with, but to actually draft the language. So we're getting a lot of political capital, not just at the state level, but at our regional level and at the local level. So this has been a really great outcome so far, and we suspect that there will be no problem. The governor's office has indicated they support the bill. So that's really good, but a lot of maneuvering and all of that. So the last issue I'll discuss, and if there's time later, we can talk about more.
Oh, come on.
Why? Okay, sorry, I didn't know why I was muted. I didn't touch anything. I don't know why that happened. Anyway, association health plans. Back again for 3 consecutive years, this being the 3rd year. I think you all have seen some of the information coming out of the Virginia Realtors. Here is where we are on those bills. There were 2. We were hearing that there was still some heartburn coming out of the governor's office. Remember, the governor vetoed the bill last year, and we were able to overturn the veto in the Senate and came short only a few votes of overturning the veto in the House. The patrons last year, Delegate Chris Hurst from Blacksburg, Senator George Barker from Northern Virginia, both very moderate Democrats, pro-business and good foot soldiers for the governor, were not willing to not go forward this year. They were motivated and they wanted to keep the momentum and they wanted the issue to keep going. So we moved forward on the bill. When the word started spreading, at least through the House, that there was still going to be some pushback from the governor's office, Delegate Hurst just felt that maybe the best thing to do was pull back a year, wait for the governor to not be the governor anymore, wait for the election and have a new governor at the mansion, and then push forward. So, in considerable consultation with Delegate Hurst, the decision was made to have his bill remain in the House. So that is where it rests. And it was gentle. It was not that the bill was killed. It was not that the bill was, anything nefarious was done with it. It was a gentle way for the bill to go away this year. And we did that with great reservation and some disappointment. We expected the same play from Senator Barker. And so on Friday, my intention had been to do a legislative lightning round for all of you. Well, we were hearing that Senator Barker wasn't as willing to lay his bill on the table, that he was desiring to keep moving forward. He thought this would be the year to do it, and he did not want to stop. So there was no legislative lightning round because things were moving so quickly, even over the weekend, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and we came around the blessing from Senator Barker to keep going. So that's where we are. We are still going. The bill is on the floor today. And in fact, I'm flipping over. The Senate has not started yet, but that bill is on the floor of the Senate today. And I'll tell you, Senator Monty Mason and Senator Linwood Lewis were absolute rock stars. I taped a portion of that committee hearing. I sent it to Cindy. She may have sent it out to you guys, but Monty Mason went down a line of questions. Don't ever ask a question you don't know the answer to in the world of legislating. And he set the stage for getting it exactly where we wanted it to be. We were prepared to testify. Aaron Barton and our expert, Chris Condalucci, who's been working on these bills across the country, were waiting to testify along with a few others. And Senator Lewis simply said, Mr. Chairman, we don't really need the experts. We have heard this for 3 years. We know what this bill is about. Let's just pass the bill. And boom, out of committee. It was gorgeous. Loved it. So that bill is now headed to the floor. The call to action has been reopened. I hope you all have been responding to it. We will need you again on the House side, and just keep helping us make a difference and keep helping us get the message out, because it is not possible without your input. We want this to happen, and we want it to happen this year for you guys. And we are working so hard to make sure that that comes together. So those are the big issues. I know we've got our special guests in the waiting room, but maybe for a couple of minutes, if you all have a question or two, I can answer, and then we can maybe wrap up there toward the end. But happy to answer any questions if you guys have them.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay.
Great job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cindy, I'll turn it to you if you want to let in Drew and Carolyn.
Okay, I'm going to let them in now, and then you can introduce them to the group.
Sure. There he is. Hey, Drew.
Hello,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Nice to see you.
Yeah,
It's been a while.
it
I
has
see
been.
Carolyn's in there too. Hey, Carolyn.
Hi, how are you? I'm here.
We're good. How are you?
We're hanging in here.
Good. Been a little bit of a while, but here we are. So
Yeah.
I want to thank you both for being with us this afternoon for a new program we've started this year to try to really bring more involvement and awareness to our members on issues both at the local level and at the state level primarily. And you all just missed a great rundown of the legislative actions that we're working on during the General Assembly, but we thought we'd spare you because I'm sure there's a lot that you're hearing about out of Richmond right now too. But we really do appreciate your time this afternoon. I know that you all are extremely busy, but we wanted to give the members here a chance to really get a sort of a lowdown on the Neighborhood Balance Committee and how that evolved and the time and the care that was taken and what the outcomes are and where we're going moving forward. So for just a second, I'll introduce you both if you don't mind. We have with us, ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Trivet, who's the city manager of the city of Williamsburg. Drew is a good UVA guy and is a proud Who. We love that part here in this house. And he was also the assistant city manager out in Bristol. So he's very familiar with our beloved Virginia, and certainly is a proud Virginian himself, and spent some time, I believe, Drew, down in the Florida area as well before you realized you needed to come back to God's country. So we're glad you're here in Williamsburg. And we also have with us Carolyn Murphy, who is the city's zoning administrator, and she deals with issues regarding planning, including the comprehensive plan, and with all of the zoning issues, including the rental inspection program, neighborhoods, and has been at the city for many years. And I've enjoyed a really good relationship with Carolyn. In normal times, she and I would have been at Layaka at least every other month or so, having a nice sip of wine. But those days will come back. But I've worked very closely with both Drew and Carolyn on the NBC, and was pleased to be a part of that really strong exercise. And I think that they will have a lot of details to share with you that will be helpful, and that I think will give you the sense of different people coming together to come toward outcomes that will protect the character of the city, which always is important to all of you as you go through the transactional process of listing and selling homes. So with that, Cindy, do you want me to just turn it straight over to Drew? And I don't know if he has the screen sharing ability. He might need to if he doesn't have that.
Hey, Drew, it's Cindy. I'm just trying to make sure that you have the controls. Can you see?
Yeah, it looks like I do.
Yep. Okay, perfect. Well, it's great having you this afternoon. So we will just let you drive the car.
All right, excellent. So before I share my screen, I want you to know that Carolyn and I are both certified planners with the American Institute of Planning. And so very often we get a little too planning wonky. And if that happens, don't hesitate to ask a question. I've got a lot of material to cover in a short period of time. I'm going to give you the same presentation that we gave to City Council, and that presentation took just about 2 hours. So if you don't have that kind of time, feel free to leave now. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to try to do it in about 20 minutes. So we'll slim it down and try to get to the important parts, which is really where we landed as a committee in terms of what we wanted to see the city council consider as next steps. All right. Can you see the screen? All right, good deal. All right, so we'll start with the timeline here, and the importance of the timeline is really just so you can see the scope of the work. This starts in September, and that's September of 2019, just by the way. I had to go back in my mind, Susan and Carolyn, to try and figure that one out, but it did. It's 2019, September is when we actually started working on this in earnest. A committee was formed. The committee was made up of representatives from all the different stakeholder groups, including students, women married administrators, landlords, city staff, and neighborhood residential owners, single family owner occupied owners. We felt like the makeup of the committee was really important to make sure that as we went through the process of talking about neighborhood balance, we had balance in the committee's comments and thoughts, so that when we got to the point of recommendations, they came from a point of everybody's interest being served. And I think we achieved that in the end, as difficult as it was in the process. So we started in September of 2019. We had a total of 8 meetings during this period, and you're going to see a pretty big time gap here as we transition into 2020. And the reason is, of course, COVID-19 made it very hard for us to meet in person. And we kept holding out hope, like many others, that someday we would be able to meet in person, and ultimately didn't get that chance. And so we moved the committee into a virtual meeting setting, and were able to finally begin wrapping up the process with a presentation to City Council, which is what I'm showing you today. So I'm just going to walk you through those 8 meetings, and I'm going to do it in short order. So I'm not going to give you a whole lot of detail. The first meeting was really just organizational. And so what we did there was we tried to set the table of what it was we were trying to accomplish and what the rules of the road were. So we talked a lot about what the existing conditions were. We had Sarah Stafford from William & Mary come in, Dr. Stafford, and present the current condition of housing that she had done in a housing study that the Association of Realtors helped acquire. And then we talked about occupancy limits and our current restrictions. We talked about rental inspections and how that works. And of course, we talked about rental conversion rates. And that's the number that a lot of people focus on when they talk about neighborhood balance, is how many of the residential structures in a neighborhood are owner occupied versus rentals. And a lot of people in the neighborhood, if they're owner occupied, start to get nervous when those percentage numbers increase above 50%. So then we did something sort of odd, I guess some people would think was strange. We really looked at a housing document that was prepared by Mayor Walsh in Boston. You may be familiar with his name now, whereas you might not have been a few weeks ago. He's actually at this very moment testifying in front of the Senate as his confirmation hearing for Secretary of Labor in President Biden's cabinet. But his platform when he was elected mayor was really about housing and improving Boston's housing opportunities. And I became sort of enamored with the plan, because as I read it, I saw more and more similarities between the city of Boston's environment and the city of Williamsburg's environment in terms of what the pressures were we were experiencing, the pressures that they are experiencing. Of course, the scales are very different, but when you look at the numbers, it's actually pretty similar. So the plan here, chapter 5, talked about student housing particularly, and they identified 8 different strategies to try and deal with the student housing issue, and then achieve some success. This is a plan that's ongoing, and they report on it every year to their city council. And so we just threw up some statistics of how they're doing. Then we had a special presentation by Jeff Klee, who talked to us about the importance of preservation. A lot of people think that in the city of Williamsburg, our very strict ARB design guidelines for corridors and other areas of the city drive up housing costs. And so we wanted to balance that out by talking about why preservation is important. At meeting number 3, we talked about a recent issue of a planning journal that comes out every month, and it was Zoning 10, so it came out in October, and it was timely because it was talking about rental regulation and how to achieve results in predominantly rental areas. And the spectrum at the bottom is probably the most important part of the slide of how you can influence rental behavior, particularly landlords, in terms of maintenance. And Virginia, currently their rental regulations, what's allowed for a locality to do, places sort of at the middle of the list of that spectrum. So it starts with nothing happens unless it's complaint driven, and goes all the way through a very strict, licensed, performance-based point system for landlords. And we talked a little bit about an example of that here in Brooklyn. And what they do there is they use one of those very strict points-based systems where, as a landlord, you basically get demerits when you violate a city code. And if you achieve so many demerits in a year, you lose your rental license for a period of time. Depending upon how severe the infractions are, could determine, you could lose it for 6 months, you could lose it for 2 years, you could lose it permanently. So a pretty effective tool in getting compliance with various maintenance issues. So then we started our sort of outside speaker segments of the meeting, and we had George Homewood, who is the planning director in Norfolk. And, for all of these planning directors that we had come speak to us, the questions were very similar. Tell us about how you achieve neighborhood balance in your communities. How do you manage the balance of single family owner occupied to rental? How do you manage the interaction of our active student base with those permanent homeowners that obviously have very different schedules and very different interests when it comes to what their property offers to them? So from Norfolk, what we learned was obviously a lot of things, but the number one takeaway was really that their best tool is a program that is a voluntary certification program. And it essentially works very similar to those harsher landlord points-based systems that we just talked about, but it's voluntary. And the city basically, if you jump through the various hoops, regulatory hoops of an inspection, a training program, then you get a rent-ready certified sticker, basically, that you put on the house, and it allows people to know that that home has been through the process. And you as a landlord are trained to be a landlord in the city of Norfolk. Now, what makes this particularly successful is the fact that they have partnered with the Navy. And the Navy actually requires their personnel who live off base to rent from landowners that are certified. So it really makes this a valuable tool if you're trying to make money in the rental market in Norfolk. So at the next meeting, we had Alexander Ikefuna, who was the planning director in the city of Charlottesville. And he came in and talked to us, and we were really surprised at the lack of progress in this arena that the city of Charlottesville had made. It was clear that the city of Williamsburg was already light years ahead in terms of regulation, but also in terms of our working relationships with both the landlords and the university from where the city of Charlottesville is. But we did learn a little bit. One of the things that they do in Charlottesville is that they have a fairly active interaction with the university. It may not be successful interaction, but it's interaction at two different levels. Sort of at a policy level, where they have the mayor meet with the president and the city manager, and they talk about sort of the larger scope, bigger issues. And then there's also a technical advisory committee that meets, that's made up of those people that are responsible for making the major planning decisions for both the university and the city. And that's the piece that we don't do. We do the first piece. We do that policy meeting every month. We meet with William and Mary. We talk about what's going on. We work exceptionally well together. But we don't have sort of that secondary tier of a technical group that's meeting to follow up on issues that might have come up in the policy group. So next we had Blacksburg, and we had Ann McClung, and Ann is doing fantastic work in the town of Blacksburg, all to deal with housing. And they have all of the same issues that we do. And by the time we got to Blacksburg, I started to recognize sort of a pattern in terms of how these cities relate to the city of Williamsburg. And I told the committee that one way to think about these cities is they are 10 years ahead of where we are right now in their housing markets. And if we don't do anything except let the market play out uninfluenced, we will find ourselves in the same situations that they are in, which are basically where we are now, but with 10 years more pressure. right? So there's 10 years more rental conversion, there's 10 years more of substandard student housing, and 10 years more frustration on the part of the single family owner occupied housing. So when Ann came, she talked to us a lot about programs that they were considering doing. They have a group that's meeting very similar to our Neighborhood Balance. It's called Build Better Blacksburg. And that group is considering a lot of different avenues to try and increase the availability of affordable housing, influence student interactions in the communities, have better landlords, all of the above. And so we took away a lot from what she had to tell us, but a lot of what her programs had to do with were successful interactions with Virginia Tech funding new initiatives that would drive the housing market, whether that was employee housing for Virginia Tech professors or investing in student housing in a public-private partnership.
From your desk. Lovely.
At the next meeting, we had Ed LeClaire, and Ed is the planning director in State College Borough, Pennsylvania. That's the home of Penn State. Obviously a much larger school than William & Mary, so you can imagine what their housing market is like. And we wanted to have Ed come because Carolyn and I were at the National Planning Conference a couple years ago, and they were focused on student housing issues. And so there were a number of sessions that dealt with that. One of the speakers in one of those sessions was Ed LeClaire. And it was obvious to us that sort of the converse to city of Charlottesville, State College Borough is light years ahead in terms of regulation from where the city of Williamsburg is. Now, that's not to imply that what they're doing we would want to do, because I don't know that we would. In fact, we can't, because the state of Virginia doesn't allow us to take a lot of the steps that they have taken. They have a very rigorous landlord certification program, rental licensing program, and do take away licenses for landowners that fail to abide by the city code. And that's what I highlighted here was they call it their rental permitting system. It's a points-based system. Basically, if you get so many points in a year, you lose your permit. Very effective in getting compliance with the various ordinances in State College Borough. Now, one of the other things I didn't put on a slide in terms of major takeaways from Ed's discussion was they have tried a lot of things, and we're not afraid to say some of them didn't work, and we had to close those programs, end those funding opportunities because they didn't achieve the results we were after. And that's why we had these speakers come in, so that we didn't try to reinvent the wheel, particularly a wheel that was broken, so that we could get it right, hopefully from the first start. So at meeting number 7, we sort of circled back and tried to cover some of the topics that we had already looked at. We talked about a segment of the housing market that's often forgotten. Chapter 3 in the Boston Plan has to do with middle income housing. You know, when we say the word affordable housing, everybody, particularly those people probably on this call, conjure up an image of what that is, right? In most places, that is income restricted to HUD guidelines, and it is congregated housing for low income individuals. And I think what we have learned as a nation is, for the most part, that type of housing is not successful. So now what we look to do is mixed income housing, where you have units that are HUD restricted mixed in with market rate units, as well as what we like to call workforce housing, which can have a totally different definition in terms of income restriction. And that's what the middle class housing looks at. First-time home buyers, how do you open up the market to them, particularly if your housing market is very expensive, like it is in Boston, like it is in the city of Williamsburg, particularly around in the historic neighborhoods that surround the university. So I think that when we talk about solutions, we have to sort of talk holistically and not leave any of those segments out. So we looked at Williamsburg neighborhood affordability, just so you can see it there. And it becomes pretty clear that in a lot of neighborhoods in the city, it's not affordable at any level of an affordable definition. And so that's something that can't be left out of the conversation. And then we had Chip Dix, who's an attorney in Richmond, come in and talk to us about landlord law and tenant law, just to give us some insight on what does the state of Virginia currently require, what do they allow localities to do, and also what is successful and what's not about a rental ordinance or an occupancy ordinance. So very valuable information. At meeting number 8, Carolyn came back and provided an update from meeting number 1 because it had been so long in terms of the base information of rental conversions, average prices in the city, and that kind of thing. So that before we start talking about solutions that we wanted to recommend to City Council, we were doing it from a current data set. So that brings us to the meat of what this group did, and that was put together a set of recommendations for the City Council to consider. And I will tell you that when Carolyn and I started this process, we of course had our own notions about where the outcomes would go. And I don't think either one of us envisioned that we would have almost 30 recommendations for the committee and the City Council to consider. But that was the outcome. After hearing from all those planning directors, reviewing all that material from Boston, looking at the most current planning information, we really came up with an excellent set of strategies to impact what we call neighborhood balance, which covers a pretty broad spectrum of rental to owner occupied ratios, but also affordable housing. So how do you decide what to recommend to City Council? And when you've got a committee as large as the one that we had, that could be a pretty hairy proposition, especially if you were going to insist on agreement. So we put together an online electronic voting tool. We provided all the information and allowed the committee to ask questions. And then they went on their own time, read the material again, and ranked each option twice. The first time they ranked each option, they ranked them based on short-term goals. So things that we would want to try in a short order. And then they ranked them a second time based on long-term goals. So things that might have a longer term to accomplish, but would be just as impactful, maybe even more impactful. So the outcomes of that process are shown here. Now, this is a little bit of a complicated graph, so I'm going to take a second just to explain it. What this shows you are two different sets of data. The first are the green bars. So the green bars represent how many times in the voting process that particular idea was included in a ranking, regardless of where it was ranked, right? It could have been ranked 10th, it could have been ranked 20th, could have been ranked 1st, but it was in the ranking that people submitted the most often. So if you look at the certified rental program, over 90% of the people that participated in the voting ranked that item in their ranking, right? So then the blue line shows you the next piece of information, which is of the people who ranked that item, what position was it in the ranking? So what you can see here is the certified rental program was most often included in a ranking, which just tells you that the committee thought that that was an excellent strategy to impact neighborhood balance. It was not the top ranked item. The top ranked item was to repeal the 4-person allowance. So, you might have only had 4 people rank that, but those 4 people all ranked it as number 1. So we provided both sets of information to City Council because they both sort of indicate two different things. The blue line is most impacted by the factions that were represented on the committee, right? Because if William and Mary's representatives did not like an idea, they were not going to rank it toward the top. And if you were an owner of an owner-occupied home and you represented a neighborhood, you were probably going to rank the 4-person repeal as high as possible. So that's why we wanted the council to consider all of the data that we collected in the voting. As you can see, the top vote getters were certified rental program, trash cart ordinance, town gown reporting, adopt a cop academy, nuisance property ordinance, and the second shift compliance inspectors. So I'm going to just talk about what those really mean in a little bit of order. So certified rental property program, we talked about that as we made our way through the presentation. We really think this, at least the staff certainly thinks that the committee got this one right. Most people ranking this item is because this is probably the #1 thing we could do to move the needle in terms of improving relationships between the rental properties and the single family owner occupied homes. Because we can use this to not only deal with poor instances of student behavior, but also poor instances of landlord behavior. And what we get from residents are complaints in both arenas. So this would be a voluntary program like Norfolk's. We would start to put together what the requirements might be for the certification. And obviously our Navy is William & Mary. So what we would do is ask William & Mary to make this a requirement for their students who want to live off campus, that home be in the certified rental program with City of Williamsburg. So the next top vote getter was institute a trash card ordinance. And if you don't live in the City of Williamsburg, this may not make any sense to you at all. But if you live in the City of Williamsburg, a major issue along our city streets are trash carts. It used to be that if you lived in the city, we actually had a trash collection system where the garbage collectors got out of the truck, walked behind your home, collected the garbage from the can, and carried it back to the truck. And some number of years ago, to save costs, we eliminated that program. And we gave out carts, and now you have to bring the cart down to the curb. And very often people forget to take their cart back to the home. And this is a major complaint from neighbors along the street, is when that cart is left out too long. So instituting a trash cart ordinance would help that. Obviously, it's widely speculated that the #1 offenders of that are students. An annual town gown report, we heard from most of the planning directors that this is something that they do, and it gives an opportunity for the city council and the community to really talk about what's the town gown relationship like, what's worked in the past year, and what hasn't. We heard from the city of Blacksburg that one of the things that they report on are the instances of noise violations, code violation citations that are issued, and corrections of those things. So it gives you a good platform to talk about not only the things that are wrong, but the positive progress that was made also. Adopt a Cop Academy is another program that came from Virginia Tech. What they do is they basically have an officer who gets adopted by a fraternity organization. And over a 6-month period, that police officer works with the fraternity to help them understand the various codes, regulations, but also to provide a more friendly face to those police interactions that often are negative. So, the idea behind community policing is to provide more opportunities for you to interact with the police force that don't involve you getting a speeding ticket or being arrested. So that you can really see what the other aspect of their jobs are as members of the community. Nuisance property ordinance, obviously this was a top vote getter. This is something that the city currently does not have the authority to do. So if we wanted to pursue it, we would have to ask the General Assembly to give us that ability. I don't know how successful that would be, but it is a top vote getter. So that's likely something that we will pursue in a future session of the General Assembly. So then we come to the long-term results, and you can see that the items are slightly different. And the first one, the #1 vote getter was the Community Land Trust, followed in a tie with Preservation Assistance Program, and then the Direct Loan Program, Inclusionary Zoning, Hotel to Affordable Housing Conversion, and University-Sponsored Employee Housing. Now, there's a theme there. The theme is expense, right? Almost all of those require some level of investment. And I think that is why the committee scheduled them under the long-term goals, because they knew setting aside sums of money that would move the needle in any of those programs would probably take a little while. So we'll just quickly talk about those. Community Land Trust, the idea here is pretty simple. If there was a pot of money available, then the land trust could buy the land underneath the home and remove the land costs from the consideration for a buyer. There's a number of ways to execute that, but that's it in its simplest form. Preservation Assistance Program, the idea here is that there is an expense associated with complying with the design guidelines established by the ARB. And if there was a pool of money to help qualified buyers, then it would remove that concern as they go into a purchase process. A direct loan program. If there was a pool of money where we could mix funds with a lender to help bring down the rate, although rates are pretty low right now. We don't know what they might be in the future. And sometimes public funding can help bring the rate down considerably if it's mixed. I'll only mention a mixed loan because that would help the money go further. Inclusionary zoning, you've probably heard this term before. This is the process of requiring some percentage of affordable restricted homes in a new housing development that's planned. So in other words, you know, if you were building 1,000 houses and you had a percentage requirement, that percentage of those 1,000 homes would have to be income restricted. And then that's just something that gets adopted into an ordinance. In the city of Williamsburg, this is complicated because much of our land is already built out. And the future of large scale housing projects is pretty limited. So when we consider this, we have to think about in lieu of fee collection that might help fund some of those other monetary programs that we just talked about. So this will be an exciting conversation in the affordable housing arena. Hotel to affordable housing conversion. This is something that we already do. We've used up the allowance in the ordinance for the number of units for this. So basically this is taking old hotel stock, particularly exterior entry rooms, and allowing them to convert those to affordable or income restricted apartments. Been very successful in the city so far. And then this last chart talks about affordable housing particularly because as we got into neighborhood balance, it became impossible to separate the idea of affordable housing, but it was not a topic that the Neighborhood Balance Committee was really equipped to deal with. But we didn't want to lose the really great suggestions that came out of the committee. So we put them together in a separate list that will be forwarded to an affordable housing work group that kicks off at the end of February. That will start looking at all of the issues that came out of the neighborhood balance that deal with affordable housing. And as you can see here at the bottom, a lot of them are the same ones: the community land trust, preservation assistance, direct loan, inclusionary zoning, hotel to affordable housing. But then it moves into some new ones: university sponsored employee housing, a neighborhood stabilization program, a contingent interest program, university housing incentives for their employees, housing needs analysis, and a repurchase program. Housing needs analysis is one that placed low, but probably is of critical importance. And as the affordable housing work group gets started, I think that will be a primary focus initially. You have to know where you are to know where you're going. And that would be the importance of the needs analysis. So I could go on. I'm going to stop there so I can answer your questions.
Drew, that was great. I think there were so many things that we could go into in a much more, I think, detailed level. I know we also have on our Zoom today Elizabeth Walthall, a Williamsburg Area Association of Realtors member, and also had the pleasure of working with Elizabeth on the NBC. She was like me, we were at all those meetings together, virtually or otherwise. And I think because of what she does professionally, she really brought a unique perspective to the discussions. I think where we are is a couple of points to leave with you all. Drew mentioned a couple of times the report that was developed by Dr. Sarah Stafford. I mean, that happened because of the Williamsburg Area Association of Realtors. And I think we could be very helpful in working perhaps even with Dr. Stafford again on a housing needs analysis, because as what Drew said, it's hard to develop a path for where you want to go if you don't know what you already have. So there's certainly, I think, a role that we can continue to play going forward. But all of this came together, really around the need for how do we balance the rental population in the city, particularly with our students in our neighborhoods that are adjacent to the college, and maintaining those property values and making sure that the relationships are so strong. I love the way, although it may have sounded convoluted, it worked really well. I think Elizabeth would concur. The voting methodology that Drew walked us through, like how to construct that, how to take our time as NBC members and really impact the outcome, I think that was extremely helpful. And so it was a very diverse group. Drew kind of warned me before going into it that it was there were a lot of personalities to manage around that table, and there were. But I think we did a really good job of managing those personalities and of finding a great deal of common ground, both for the short term and the long term. I'm certainly, if you all want to send questions through the chat, I can monitor the chat if you want, or Cindy, if you want to just take open questions and maybe let Drew and Carolyn walk into some additional details. It's however you want to move forward on the remaining time that we have.
We can certainly entertain any questions. That I don't know that we would have a lot. It was a lot of great information, Drew. I appreciate you kind of dumbing it down to those of us who don't do what you do every day. I deal with this every day at my house, living with a planner myself. I hear a lot of these terms somewhat, but I always have to say, now dummy that down for me and put it in layman's terms. So you did a great job. I didn't feel like I was struggling to understand your presentation. It was well done. I know it was a lot of hard work. And I just want to reiterate, and Charlotte and Dale, you can jump in here, but we are always willing to partner and help you be a part of the solution and to give you any data or information that we have. We are always willing to share and partner with our city in any way we can. So just know that we are here for you. We're a resource for you. I'm sure that if we have any questions that come up afterwards, that if we reach out, that you would be willing to help us after the fact too, because I know we've tried to keep this to an hour for our members. But Dale,
Absolutely.
Charlotte, if you all have anything to say.
I was just gonna make, excuse me, Charlotte, I hope I didn't step on you, Charlotte. But I was just gonna make the suggestion that you forward your questions so we can get them answered, because we are right at the end of the hour. So any questions you have, great presentation. Thanks, Drew.
It was great. Thank you for taking the time. And I put it in the chat, but I'm sure everyone feels that. Kudos to the committee for coming up with certainly with some really wonderful recommendations and really detailed recommendations. So that will help the city moving forward for sure. So great job by the whole committee.
Sure. One thing that we did is in the presentation, you probably saw it, we tried to give as much detail on the slides as possible to explain what these programs were, not only where we learned them, how they worked there, but also how they might work here, so that you could really evaluate what would be the impact of this in Williamsburg. So probably the best thing that we could do is make sure that you all have the PowerPoint. That way you can digest it in your own time, and certainly send us any questions that you have. The city council, basically, we gave this report to them. As you can see, it's a tremendous amount of information. And so they basically said, hey, staff, can you come up with an implementation plan of what steps we might take first? And so that's where we are right now. Carolyn and I have to come back to council with, here's what we think we should do now. Here's what we think we should do next year. And so as we do that, then we'll know what steps we're going to take next. And so any input that you have after looking at the PowerPoint or any questions that you might have certainly will help us as we put together that next step.
Perfect. Perfect.
I will also mention to our members, Drew and Carolyn, I'm just letting you know that we are recording this. I probably should have said that up front. I think I said it maybe before you joined the meeting, but we do keep it just for our members only, so that those that couldn't join us at the noon, that we'd like to share that with them so that they can watch it on their own time. So hopefully, Drew, are you okay with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And of course, the city records all of our meetings. So if you really want to be bored to death, you can spend 2 hours of your life that you won't get back listening to me go on and on about this.
So I was going to pop in and say, on my other screen, I'm watching our flood bill being presented on the House floor, just out of an FYI. But I love the idea that what the committee came up with are just things that can take us out, recommendations and actions that can take us out. Really, if we're talking about something as extensive as a potential community land trust or a land bank, that's potentially a 10-year exercise. And I will share with you that your association to the east, VPAR, is actually digging a little deep into that as well. And we are actually having some discussions with Maurice Jones, who's the former Secretary of Commerce and Trade, himself a land bank expert on how do we put all of this together. So I think that might be something, Drew, that you and Carolyn and I can even talk about once I have some additional sets of data from Maurice. But these are really it's a continuum of solutions that I think is the best outcome of this, the short term and the long term, that can really just be a game changer for the city. So it was an honor to be part of the group. I know Elizabeth feels the same way. And I think too, to Dale's point, I'm going to have to bounce off, and I've got House and Senate concurrent on 2 screens. So I'm going to bounce off, and I really appreciate you, Drew and Carolyn, being with us today. So send me
you.
questions and I'll get them answered if you guys have them.
Perfect. Cindy, you want to wrap it up?
Yes, just thank everybody for joining. Spread the word that we have these ongoing throughout the year. Hopefully you all are finding them valuable. Again, this will be placed on our YouTube channel for our members and in our newsletter. So pass it along for those that weren't able to join us to try to at least watch it in their own time. But thanks, and I hope to see everybody at our next Power Hour.